Hi, Xander. Thank you for joining us today on Career Companions Career Journeys.
No, thank you for having me. Super excited to be here.
You're more than welcome. And look, I'm really excited to, discuss your career journey to date and where you've come from and I guess what you've done. So, to begin with, do you want to tell us what your current job title is and what it is you do?
Yeah, so I'm the social operations manager for Amazon Prime Video, and I work across LACANS, which is a region that covers Brazil, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Mexico, and all of Latin America. And yeah, big region there, some fun time zones to work across. But I'm fortunate enough to work with an amazing team of social managers, and effectively, my job is really around how do I create processes or operational ways of working that can unlock more capacity to focus on creative work to engage with our customers, as well as also looking at how we can be more efficient in terms of getting content in front of customers, as well as measuring things and being more timely and efficient in that regard as well.
And do you like what you do?
Yeah, I really love what I do. I've been fortunate enough to work in and around social media for about 15 years now, almost 16. So it's been a really long journey, and kind of seeing the evolution of social media has been really fascinating. But the longer I've spent on the tools, the more I've realized that I actually enjoy kind of building the processes around it, as opposed to necessarily doing the content creation these days. I will admit TikTok still kind of blows my mind, and I feel a little bit like a Zoomer when I'm on it. So yeah, really important for me to like try and be in the background now, enabling like the up and comers in terms of social media, as well as people who are really passionate about that kind of content to be able to do their best work without having to worry about stuff like when will I get my reports on time or will I get the right reports and things like that as well.
I have so many questions right now, and I know the audience will be like, "Oh my God, tell us more! Like, we want to learn the art of this. This is like new." Well, I guess 16 years ago. What is that when it? That's when it first came out. 2020. I was creating my first Facebook account, I think.
Yeah. So it's called a long time back. I really got my start working at an SEO agency called Web Salad at the time. And effectively, the job there was working to do backlinking in social media. So at the time, the focus was very much on search engine optimization, and the thinking being that if you had lots of links going through to your website, it would increase like your prominence in terms of the search engine results. So when you were searching in Google, for example, had more backlinks and meant that your site was credible, sorry, and there was a better chance of you kind of indexing. Anyways, at that time, social media, particularly MySpace, was kind of the big thing. Everyone remembers their top 8 friends and kind of getting that all coded in. So what we used to do was backlink from MySpace or GeoCities and all of those different websites back in the day, High Five, Bebo. And at the time, what I was noticing was that if you wrote longer form content, you would see more engagement with that as opposed to necessarily just having links, particularly on like link indexing sites and things like that as well. But over time, like that evolved obviously with the kind of rollout of Facebook, which eventually kind of overtook MySpace, obviously. And then,
I can't believe you said MySpace. I was like, wow, now I am going back.
yeah, high five, all of those. But it was really fascinating to see that evolution. And then, like, moving into the kind of creative advertising agency where I worked online, Nathan, for a long time, being a community manager. And back then, it wasn't really called community management, it was just, I guess, posting content. And at that time, I was responsible for managing the social channels of Forex Gold, TUI Super Dry, no, not TUI Super Dry, sorry, TUI's Extra Dry, Han Super Dry, and those different brands there. And it was really fascinating because it was kind of really at the coalface of dealing with customers. Like it was the time when social media was really taking off, like lots of people were starting to use it, particularly as a channel to communicate with brands. And it was before it had been as monetized as it is now in terms of focusing on data as well as like the algorithm. Back then, because there weren't as many users, it meant that a lot more content was seen. And as a result, brands were starting to really lean into it. It was also quite funny because a lot of the time it was at the back of presentations. So you used to go into client pitches or meetings and be like, oh, we've got like the marketing, we've got the digital, we've got the search, blah, blah, blah. And then they're like, oh, we've got like 2 slides of social at the end if we get to it. Whereas
Yeah.
now, it's
And you had
really
the print,
fascinating.
right? And the big banners you'd have rather than the,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. But now these days, social is usually at the front of a lot of presentations because it is so important, particularly from an advertising perspective, but also from customer engagement, content, and everything else. So it has been really fascinating to see that change.
I can't, like, yeah, roller coaster for anyone who's been in your career. So let's go back to the very beginning. And I mean, way back,
Yep.
because obviously we're talking to school students all the time, and we want them to, I guess, gain an understanding of your roots, where you came from. When you were in high school, was there any subject, or did you ever in your wildest dreams think this would be your job?
No. And I think that's the really fascinating thing about like what I do. When I was at school, social media didn't really exist. Like, sure, in year 11 and year 12, or in those kind of final years of school, like social media started to become something that we talked about and used. But at the time, we didn't actually know that it would turn into a career. I remember going through school thinking that I might have been a vet or potentially worked as a game designer because I've always been passionate about gaming and technology and animals. But what ended up happening is I kind of fell into marketing and indirectly this kind of niche within it as well, which is super fascinating. And I think, like, as I reflect on that, there was nothing I think at school they really could have prepped me for when it came to social
Right.
media because it was a mix of like creativity, the ability to code, and thinking on your feet, and kind of always being well, flying by the edge of your seat, to be honest, on a lot of things because it changes so quickly as well. Like if yeah, we spoke about algorithms and like hacking the feeds and things like that. I don't think it would have meant anything to a school kid. And I think even now, for the people that are going through high school, some of the advice I would share is that like I wouldn't fixate on the jobs of today as much as just being open to the jobs of tomorrow. Because there are so many things that are starting to happen, even with the advent of AI and like even now with cloud, like which isn't new, but it's been around for a long time. Like it's continuing to evolve and it creates new jobs. And I think just being open to trying new things and experiencing things is super important, particularly in the workspace, and not kind of fixating on saying, I have to do this and hedging all of your bets against that. Because once you do that, it can also feel really disheartening if you're not making progress towards that goal and you might close off other opportunities. And that's kind of how I ended up in social. I kind of said yes to going and doing an interview about search engine optimization, which at the time I had no idea about.
Yeah. So this is interesting that you've said this. Your career actually never started officially in social media or anything like that. It was a full evolution, which is what we're finding now. A lot of our careers have been. So none of us ever went into what we were thinking we were going to be into.
Hmm.
And instead, it's evolved through time. And you've evolved then to and adapted to the piece that you're interested in, right? So what was your very first job ever?
I've been really lucky that I had really supportive parents who tried to get me working young, just so it would like kind of teach me a good work ethic. So my very first job ever was painting oil onto fence posts at 50 cents a post.
Oh,
So
wow.
basically, we'd have to get crude oil and walk around in a paddock painting fence posts. And I remember doing that for a couple of weeks and then kind of leaving that pretty quickly after I got chased off the property by a snake one time.
Oh,
Um, but after that, I was fortunate enough to get a job at a company.
resilience.
Resilience indeed. But after that, I actually got a job at Domino's, and at the time, like the way that we had to find jobs wasn't like hopping onto social media and browsing around. It wasn't hopping onto Seek and all of these different platforms that we have at our hands today. Instead, it was picking up a newspaper and reading classified ads.
Yeah.
It's depressingly, yeah, I'm not going to go deeper on that
Cutting
one.
them out one by one.
Pretty much. But I remember going there for that and like reading this newspaper out, and then my dad driving me to the interview and working at Domino's. I think I started there when I was either 13 or 14. I'm working there literally through till I was about 20, 21. So being fortunate enough to travel after school, but coming back and still having a job there as well. And working in that kind of industry taught me a lot about like working with customers as well. So being yeah, it was interesting working at Domino's. Like back then, it wasn't kind of touch screens and service like we see with McDonald's now. You actually had to memorize the codes for different pizza orders and things like that. You also didn't have maps in the car, so you used to be driving around in your little
I
Toyota Yaris with
forgot
a
to deliver.
DVD.
I forgot.
Yeah, so I went all the way up from being like a doughboy to a maker to a delivery driver and things like that as well. And still in touch with people that I worked with at Domino's back then as well, which is really fascinating to me.
So that's interesting. You're looking at the whole product life cycle way back then,
Oh, yeah.
regardless of if it was like, I guess, like media or if it's like a hair thing. But
Yeah.
the interactions that you're having with the customers at every point always mattered. And I guess, would you say that was your grounding of the beginning of like your customer focus as well, and how you center around a customer experience?
Yeah, I think like working in any kind of fast food role, you have to be customer centric. We're always taught that the customer is always right in these regards, which I recently learned is an abbreviation of a longer statement. But it's interesting, like we get taught a lot about like how to deal with conflict in those situations because like working in a fast food restaurant, churning out hundreds of orders a night, things are going to go wrong, and you need to be able to kind of allay a customer that like you're hearing them and that you're going to work on fixing the problems. But conversely, you also need to reflect on where things went wrong. Like, why did the order go wrong? Was it during the dough station? Probably not, because they're just making pizza dough. Or was it on the make line because they're rushing because they have so many pizza orders? That's probably more likely where the issue happened. And then finally, like after it's gone through the oven, like did someone drop the ball a bit when it came to cutting the pizza, or did the delivery driver get lost? Like if you kind of follow the entire process from start to finish, you can usually work out like where the issue happened, and then you can usually try and fix it for future instances as well, which is kind of something that I've always been quite interested in, and probably why I do what I do now. It's kind of thinking about it that
Yeah.
way.
100%. Like it's your foundation. Like when you think about that into what you're doing now, I guess let's talk about that more. So finish it at Domino's. Where did you go to next?
Yeah, so finished at Domino's, went to uni, started this job at Web Salad as a freelancer, and then one day in a lunch break was literally browsing Twitter. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm a gamer, so noticed this tweet about these guys playing Street Fighter at lunch. And I wasn't particularly interested in what they were doing for work. I was just interested in the fact they were playing Street Fighter at lunch. So I reached out to the CEO at the time, Mike Hill, and via Twitter, said, "Look, I'd love to work for you. Can I get a job?" And then started pestering him through Twitter for a job. And eventually he relented and hired me as an unpaid intern for about 3 or 4 months there, where I was brought in and kind of dropped this paid job working for Web Salad at the time and went into this unpaid job working for Holler, which was a digital agency at the time. Mainly because I wanted to play Street Fighter versus actually doing anything else. But it did kind of give me that opportunity first to like help Mike sort all of his negatives, and then eventually kind of start to learn more about advertising agency life, which was super fascinating for me because again, it wasn't something I'd really considered and was even aware of. I think a lot of people now know about advertising and creativity, creative services because of things like Mad Men, which like popularized whiskey and kind of what it meant to work in ad land. But before then, like I hadn't even heard of what a creative advertising agency was, and it wasn't something I had even thought about studying, nor was I studying at uni.
Yeah.
I was literally doing accounting.
You were studying accounting at university.
Doing an accounting course at that point. I ended up moving into a marketing major. But it was fascinating for me because I took this job and then like it evolved into like, oh, Xander, you've had a bit of experience with social media at Web Salad. Would you consider starting to like engage with our customers on behalf of Line? And then from there, I started to learn about like account services as that exists inside of creative agencies and the difference between account services and like the creative team, which was a super important distinction because, like I said earlier, I'm not a massively creative person. Like I'm passionate about good creative, but it's not something where like I can draw a great picture. I draw terrible stick figures, and like my copywriting skills are not the best, but I can still write meaningful copy. And I think it's interesting because for me, it also meant that I started to shift my career more into like the numbers and the measurement side of things as well.
Yeah.
And as I continued to work at Holler, like it became a bit of a distinction for me is that like I was able to articulate in terms of the metrics and the performance side of things as well, more so than the creative side of things. And then that started to follow me throughout my career as well. And again, like another kind of layer. And I think this is what happens as you move through your career is you kind of take layers and like you start to build it up and build up this skill set. And like I said, at Domino's, I've learned to think about the process and like how to fix parts of that. And then as I started to move into this role, I was learning about social media and like how that was working. And then on top of that, I started to realize I could articulate measurement better than I could articulate creative ideas. And then it just kind of kept layering, which has eventually led me here as well.
So at this point, you went to university, you studied accounting, you were at obviously Domino's working in pizzas. Very customer centric though. So let's just look at, you've got the customer centric piece then nailed and down packed. You have this passion for gaming though. Would you say it was your passion for gaming that was driving your career in this way more than anything? Like, and for understanding, like I guess that computer piece behind it all, or was it like what was it that was actually driving you in this direction, or was it more just this is something new every single day? Like, there's nothing that I'm not learning here. Was it the full learning piece and continuous learning?
I think so. Like I said, I had always kind of envisioned working in gaming. And to that extent, like I did a degree at UTS, which was a Bachelor of Business combined with a Bachelor of Science in Information Technology.
Okay.
And like at the time, like it was just an accounting course as part of the business major versus like it being my full thing. But it's just, I remember thinking at the time, I was like, I cannot do this for a career. I cannot be an accountant. It's so boring. I fell asleep in those lectures quite a lot. Probably reflected in my grades. But I think like, the passion for gaming kind of drove me into technology, and being in a creative advertising agency, like a digital one as well, meant I was around computers and technology, so the internet and those kind of things. And then I think on top of that, like gaming in itself, like is quite a challenging industry to get into, particularly in Australia, simply because you either are developing games, so you're kind of coding and building that side of it, or the marketing side of it. There are roles out there that exist, but it is a smaller industry in Australia compared to other markets as well. And like at the time, I didn't really see a pathway in, other than perhaps like learning a niche skill set where people are having these conversations and talking about your games. And I guess that's how it continued to evolve as well. And for me, I was just super passionate about like iteration as well. It's just something that's always been part of my way of approaching things. Like when I catch a train, I iterate on where I sit until I find out which is the best carriage because it's closest to the stairs that get me out of the station quickly, or which lane do I drive in on my way to work. I iterate on the lanes that I drive until I work out
30
the
seconds
optimal
off.
lane. Yes, it's probably a slightly strange way of going about things.
Okay, in this job, how long were you here for at this stage? Like, how long did you stay in this position for? And how did that change? Like, you started in obviously an internship. What were you towards the end, and how long were you in that position for?
So I went from intern to account executive, which in Australia, particularly in advertising, is one of the more junior roles. So you can go account coordinator, account executive, account manager. And I ended, I believe, as an account manager because this is going back a couple of years. And after that, I was approached to join Fairfax, where I joined them as a social advertising and emerging solutions executive.
What year was this in, out of curiosity?
That is a great question. I think this is going to give me 2 seconds here to really quickly bring this up. I believe it was probably back in 2010 or 11, I think.
The reason I'm asking is because I remember when social media strategy first came out, and I was working in real estate at that time, and my boss was quite big on innovation. And he came to me saying, hey, we're going to pay for Facebook ads. And I remember thinking, what are you talking about? Why would Facebook charge for ads? So you then started joining at this time where I guess did ads start to become monetized in your time?
Yeah. I was there when MySpace was selling ads via News Corp in Australia. So News Corp actually bought MySpace, and I remember working with their sales team. I think what was interesting was during my time at Holler, working as the account executive, was also when Facebook started to make that bigger transition away from like people first marketing and focusing on building connections and community, and starting to do that bigger transition to data and connections. And like when I moved over to Fairfax, that role was in part around like how do we monetize the audiences that we have inside of social media? Because what was happening is that we started to see that Facebook, Twitters, and these kind of different social networks at the time were starting to eat into the traffic. and also starting to take business away, particularly digital ad sale business, away from Fairfax at the time. And as a result, my challenge and what was unique about the role at the time was literally like, how do you monetize social media for a publisher? And at that time, like there wasn't really the ability to say, I'm going to sell ads on Sydney Morning Herald's Instagram account to
Yeah.
X or Y brand, similar to how influencers operate now. So instead, my job was, and again, going back to that experience that I mentioned where I was focused on the numbers and the metrics and the measurement, that actually allowed me to be able to then tap in to that side of things and go, all right, how do I articulate a product that we can sell to advertisers that's still tied to social media? So one of the things we looked at is like, could we create cookies on people pressing share on our website? And as a result, if you were in like the fashion section of Sydney Morning Herald and you pressed a share link inside of that, then we would perhaps identify you as a user that is likely to share fashion content. And then what we could do is sell that audience back to an advertiser and say, hey, person, you would like to reach this audience of like fashionistas who are more likely to share content. Here is a product that we've developed, and that allows you to put ads in front of them, which they might potentially share more than your average customer. And as a result, that was very much the focus of that job. Was like, how do we create new products or solutions and then measure them as well to be able to sell them in? And again, I think this is a real interesting distinction, like my career journey, because it really forced me to think about like, how do we make a viable product out of social media that generates revenue? Whereas at the time, a lot of people were still thinking about like, how do we make more followers or how do we drive more engagement as well? And I think that was like a real branching point as my career went on. And again, going back to that advice I shared earlier about being open to opportunity, like if I had fixated on, no, I just really want to focus on like working for the beer brands and like creating fun pitches and stuff like that from the V8 supercars, yeah, that would have benefited me, but I also meant that I wasn't able to kind of move down this path where I got a lot more exposure to like thinking about how I guess senior leaders probably also think about social media. And it's one of the recurring questions we have to this day is, hey, social media person, we're spending lots of money on social media. How is this actually having business impact? And then like learning to speak their language in terms of like returns, like also against their expenses as well, but also talking about like how it can generate business value became super important to me as well.
Wow. Okay. How long did you stay at Fairfax for at this point?
Yeah, so I joined Fairfax at a time of significant change. So it was
Yeah.
in May 2012 that I joined. I think it was about 3 days after I joined, Fairfax announced Fairfax of the Future, where they were going to shut down Chullora, as well as their Tullamarine print plants, which at the time was a massive change. They were going to shift away from broadsheet print to compact print as well. And it was a really big period of change because I joined hired fresh, and literally on your third day, you hear that thousands of your employees were, or colleagues, sorry, not employees, were going to be made redundant. And I think that's like the start of a trend in my career as well, where a lot of the businesses that I join or businesses where I've moved to as my career has evolved have been in really ambiguous times because a lot of the time I join a company and unfortunately a manager might move on or there might be large layoffs. So at the time of joining Fairfax, there was this huge kind of wave of layoffs. And being in the digital kind of part of the business, I was a bit insulated from that. But it did mean that as a business, there was a lot of upheaval. And for me, I was fortunate enough to be able to stay in the role for about 2-ish years before moving into a contracting role in another part of the business as I kind of thought about what I wanted to do next as well. But always with the view of like monetizing social media on behalf of Fairfax Media, whether that was through creating new ad products or looking at ways that we could integrate advertising or social media into the advertising that we were doing at the time. Sorry.
No, that's
Um, but it was also really interesting because it was at the same time that programmatic advertising was becoming a bigger and bigger thing. So at Fairfax, we had what were called the DRX team, and they were working. And whilst I didn't work with them, I did fortunately have a friend in that team who was teaching me about it at the same time. And yeah, for me, I then started to learn a bit more about programmatic advertising and kind of made the transition to that as well.
I just It's so crazy to think where your career started and where you're at right now. And this is within how many years?
Like I said, in terms of like the transition from web seller to Fairfax, that was
Yeah.
literally 2008 to 2012. So that's 4 years. Five
Your
years,
brain
sorry,
must
to
be like it's
2013.
because
Yeah,
almost
5
with
years.
every single job you're changing jobs, you're growing, and you're growing as technology's booming, right? So you're going through the whole technology boom. You're also going through the GFC, it sounds like, at the same time. So you're, you're going through
Yeah,
a huge
it
change.
was really fascinating. It was like, again, because social was growing so quickly and I kind of fell into this niche by being open to this opportunity, like I was really lucky to be able to ride this wave. And I feel like it's a wave that continues to kind of grow and grow. Like social media doesn't stand still. If I told you, have you heard of TikTok 5 years ago, most people would be like, I haven't heard about it. But now if you ask people if they know what TikTok is, everyone knows about it. And that's the nature of social media, is it is so ephemeral and that it kind of keeps evolving. New platforms keep emerging. Like it's just mind boggling. And I don't think it's something that's going to change. And I think that reflects like the bigger tech industry as well. Like leaps in quantum computing, AI even more recently. Like it does continue to evolve, and being open to kind of going where the water is flowing, or just not saying no to things because you're fixated on this is what I wanted to do with my career, means that you can evolve and grow with it as well.
So, two questions. You're really young in your career at this stage. Do you have a mentor yet? Is there someone that you've started to lean on to like talk to, and or people that you're idolizing that you've taken on as mentors, and you've reached out to them and said, "Hey, can you just help me navigate this space because I don't know what's going on, and I'm you're this new generation. Like I just see you spinning at this time because there's so much change." So, was there anyone that you were able to gravitate to, I guess, yeah, talk it all
Yeah.
through?
So, going back to that Holler example where I reached out to the CEO of the business through Twitter, similar thing with one of my very early kind of indirect mentors, I would say. So I remember once picking up a magazine, marketing magazine, I think it was called at the time, and there was a really interesting article in there by a man called David Redhill, who was the CMO of Deloitte at the time.
Okay.
Um, Anyways, being an internet native, I went about Googling David after reading his article in this magazine and being able to find his email in a press release that had gone out, and then proceeded to reach out to him and ask him for some career advice. Because the article in the magazine was called "Marketing Rock Stars of the Future." And then my email to David was like, how do I become a future marketing rock star? And David was very kind and actually responded to me. Random Gmail account sending the CMO an
Could you
email.
imagine doing that now?
I feel like his email wouldn't be as easily found.
Yeah.
In saying that, though, I can remember asking him for advice, and David provided me with a couple of points of advice, as well as some books to read, including Tolstoy's War and Peace, which I think is super important. But the other thing that he shared with me was that it was important to work lots of different roles in your career so that you can develop a perspective to argue your point of view. And it's something that's always stuck with me, and advice I continue to give to this day is that if you do one thing for your entire career, say it's sales, then you only have a sales perspective on things, which isn't wrong. You can be an expert like that. But if you do sales and you do marketing and you do all of the different parts that make up your company's organization or like those kind of roles, it gives you the opportunity to kind of see different perspectives and also develop your own perspective and kind of have a more rounded view. And I think even talking through my own experience, I went from working in a creative digital agency to then working for a media publisher, which is like at the other end of the spectrum. And then as my career evolved, I've moved, while still doing social media, I've moved into different roles within the total media landscape to be able to develop that perspective. And that's always really benefited me. The other mentors I've had throughout my career was another one at Toyota, who I still see, and I'm actually seeing later this week, which I'm excited about. And what's it called? He's always really helped me in terms of like grounding and thinking, I guess, in terms of like the broader picture with a top down view. A lot of the time when we're doing our work, we get so head down that sometimes we fail to kind of take a step back and look at the total issue, because sometimes that's when you can see where the bigger blockers are. A lot of the time we're so focused in the weeds of the things that we're failing to notice like the bigger issue that's down the line, because we're so focused on the here and now, which I think has really helped me. And the best analogy of that is if you're in a plane traveling 400 miles an hour on the ground, it'd be pretty terrifying. But when you're in a plane and you're up in the sky traveling 400 miles an hour, and you look out the window, it all looks very calm down there. So sometimes you need to try and be in the plane in the sky versus the plane on the ground, which has been really helpful. And even more recently at Amazon, I've got a great mentor who's been really kind and helped me understand Amazon's strange working culture. And it's something Amazon talks about, is it is a little bit strange, and it is. It does have different ways of doing things, which I think is great, but sometimes you need support and kind of counsel in terms of like, this feels really strange. Should I lean into the strangeness, or is it too strange and I perhaps should flag this? And having a mentor who's been in the business and experienced that degree of strange for a couple of years, they can help you kind of decide and guide you through that as well.
It's always good to have a mentor, someone you can talk to, right? To be like, am I going crazy, or is this actually?
Yeah. Is this really peculiar, or is it just me?
So after Fairfax finished, what was your next opportunity? Where did you pivot to then?
Yeah, so after Fairfax, I spent some time working with a startup called the Trade Desk, which was a really great experience. Unfortunately, it didn't work out the way that I wanted, and as a result, I actually ended up working at Kara as a social media marketing manager. So Kara is part of Dentsu Aegis, which is like one of the big holding groups of the world. And like I said, kind of transitioning to other perspectives, this is where I went from working at a publisher where media agencies traditionally buy media from, to now working for a media agency itself. And at Kara, I was responsible for working across social, across all of our clients at the time. So it was quite a broad role in terms of working with different teams. So working with like the Woolworths team, working with the David Jones team, or the MasterCard team, in order to help provide social expertise and guidance as well. So what that meant was kind of working with them when they were planning social media, in terms of looking at like how the campaigns were set up and optimizing those, as well as also kind of working with the social networks to help make sure that like we were upskilling the agency teams on how to best make use of social media. It was through that experience I was also fortunate enough to actually be sent to Menlo Park. So I went to Facebook's headquarters and had the opportunity to be trained over there as well. And it was really fascinating because like at that time, like Facebook had really transitioned into the dominant social player. They were really everywhere. Like we were using data tools that would go on to be used by Cambridge Analytica at the time as well, which caused its own issues. But on its whole, like social media was becoming more and more dominant. And like at this point, it was very much towards the start of the slide presentations now. So we'd be talking about digital, and then it would be social media, then it would be out of home, and then it would be TV, and then it would be radio. Whereas, like I said early on in my career, it was totally flipped, right? Social was at the end.
Are billboards
still
here?
Pardon?
Are billboards still around, or are they gone now?
Out of home's not going away. It's just getting yeah, you got to keep an eye on. But it was really fascinating because, like I said, what we saw was this huge transition, and in this role, like I had to work with big teams of people, and I wasn't actually part of like a single team. It was more of a floating role where I consulted and supported different teams in terms of like social strategy, or like how to get social listening set up, working with our publisher vendors like your Facebooks or your Twitters, your Pinterests of the world as well, and also looking at like how we did projects inside of that as well.
What year was this?
This is in 2014 through to 2016 now.
And this is like when Instagram's really starting to take off now, isn't it, as well?
Yeah. So Instagram at the time was kind of come out and like had transitioned over, so it was much bigger as well. Twitter at the time was also doing really good stuff. At the time, I got to do some really fun things like working on WeChat, which is a Chinese social network, which is based on messaging. So helping them launch David Jones onto WeChat, which was super fun. So that was before it's called Key Opinion Leaders had really taken off as well. So working with those guys as well. It was really fascinating and like a really great job for me because it gave me the buying skill set as well from a career perspective. So I'd gone from like creating ads and creating content at Holler, to then working at Fairfax, which is selling ads and developing ads. And now this moved me to buying ads as well. And like I said, kind of giving me that rounded out experience. And Kara had some really amazing clients at the time as well, including Microsoft, which is a big draw for me because obviously Xbox are owned by Microsoft, so I got exposure to gaming on that side of things as well. But at its core, it was really about training people how to use social media and how to articulate how they use social media as well. And again, a really important skill for me long term, because it meant that I had to really try and find ways to bring people's base understanding of social media up, and then kind of make sure that when we were going to market and buying and selling and talking to social media, there was a really clear vision on how Kara kind of approached that as well. And I think at the time, it was a really kind of defining role for me in terms of getting a lot more exposure to the ad side of the business as well. And a lot of the people that I worked with at that time are still working in the advertising industry and doing great things, but also kind of working with Facebooks and Twitters of the world as well now. So it's super important, I think, in these situations that you always kind of think about the future and also make sure you treat people with respect, because it is such a small industry, and that kind of work that you do there carries on and follows you as well.
And where to after Kara? What was next?
So after Kara, I took a contract working for Toyota Finance Australia.
Oh, there you go.
So one of the things we talk a lot about when you work in advertising industry is the shift to go client side. So the opportunity to move out of advertising and work for a client. And for me, that was kind of the gap in my experience at the time. And obviously thinking about David's advice he'd given to me, it was something I was really keen on. It was how do I make this transition across into client side roles? And as a result, I took a contract working for Toyota Finance, which is really great. And this took me into more of a digital marketing manager role. So looking at social media, but also looking at search engine optimization, looking at how we built digital products as well at the time. So one of the things that I got to work on was how do we get used vehicles launched inside of Toyota's websites, or how did we generate the finance calculators that our customers at the time would use as well. But one of the things that was really special about Toyota Finance to me was really actually in terms of learning about Kaizen, as well as learning about Toyota business planning, because a lot of what Toyota teaches is going to the source of the problem, or going to the source in terms of issues you're experiencing at work as well. So if you're encountering kind of conflict at work, don't indirectly talk to a person, go to the person and speak to them and have a face-to-face conversation. We're also learning, like I said, root cause analysis. So if you're in a factory and something stops working, is it because an air vent is blocked? And why is the air vent blocked? It's because a screw fell out of this specific machine. And as a result, if we look at that machine, it's because it was de-threaded because of X, Y, and Z reason. And really, really trying to follow a problem all the way back and all of the improvements you can make on the way. But also the mindset of Kaizen, which is continuous improvement as well. And like I said, this is something that really sticks with me now, is continuously optimizing and improving things. And this is actually also where I met Mark, my mentor that I still speak to today. Really defining job as well. To be honest, I think all of my jobs are defining for me, because I look back on all of them fondly and I can see what I've learned from each of them and how I continue to carry that forward as well.
It's really interesting. It's something there around going to someone directly. So prior to Toyota Finance, were you obviously had extremely good external stakeholder management because you had your clients, you were an account manager, you all that. Would you say, what about internal stakeholder management? So reflecting on what David taught you around all of that, would you say by working at Toyota Finance as well, that improved your internal stakeholder management by able to have those and learning how to have a difficult conversation? Because that's a massive skill gap now that's missing in the marketplace. People don't know how to have these conversations, and to continue your career and to build yourself up, it's really important that you can do that. So what would you say around that?
Yeah. So I think that a lot of the previous roles are service-based roles. So working in advertising agencies, you're working with a team to service a client or to service an agency and help support them. And like I said, when you work with customers, they're always right. So you're making sure that they're happy, and it means that you're probably more in a situation where you're trying to make people happy when it's not necessarily going to plan. So it's not necessarily having a hard conversation as much as it is like, yes, we'll fix this or we'll make it right. Whereas actually, no, this should have not happened because of X, Y, and Z. Whereas
Yeah.
Toyota definitely kind of started that process of learning how to have conversations in terms of internal stakeholder management. The thing that was always really fascinating about Toyota Finance is that it was a separate business to Toyota itself. They exist as two separate entities. And as a result, like we had to manage working with Toyota as a business, but also working with the car dealerships as well, because obviously they have their own interests. And it was fascinating because it taught you how to have more sideways conversations because you weren't necessarily in customer service in this situation. You were also trying to push for the right outcomes for the customers. And as a result, you had to argue on the customer's behalf to your colleagues, not necessarily arguing that, oh, sorry, our customer is unhappy for X or Y reason. It's more like we need to make this improvement to improve things there. So it was the start of that side of things in terms of how to have those conversations. But generally speaking, even at Carol, because my job was to work across all of the teams and make sure they felt supported, it did teach me a lot about like that stakeholder management in terms of education and making sure that people felt supported, particularly when they had to go on to sell things as well. And I think that it's like a constant battle, these conversations and stakeholder management, because you have to be willing to be malleable yourself in terms of how you go about engaging with stakeholders. You can't assume that everyone's going to change to meet you and vice versa. Like people will or won't change, and then you have to accept that sometimes it's not going to work out, but you still need to work towards a common outcome or goal, right?
And you said something interesting. You just made me think about something. You're a manager now. Like across, how long have you been a manager for at this stage outside Toyota?
So manager by title, not managing people at this point. So it's called, at this point, I'd been a manager for a couple of years, but in the individual contributor space. So whilst working with my peers and things like that, it was always working with the title, but not necessarily doing the managing of people, which kind of came in my next job as well, which was really interesting in itself. But in saying that, like, I think that it also taught me, like I said, how to communicate at all levels of business because social media was such a niche area of expertise. And like, yes, it had grown at this point, but people were still like, who's the social media guy? Like, what's this thing that's happening? One of my favorite anecdotes is one of my clients previously, their wife saw a bad comment on social media one time, and then she told her husband, who was coincidentally the CEO of the company, and he wanted to shut down their social media account because they'd seen some negative comments on it. But it's one of those things where it was like I would be wheeled out and it's like you have to explain to the CEO why shutting down their social media channels is a bad idea and kind of articulate it in a way that wasn't condescending to her CEO because from his perspective, like probably the most important person in his life bar his kids, I just told him like what's going on here, we need to fix this. And coincidentally it's like also trying to make it demonstrate to him like the value we can have by keeping these channels open as well. So it was quite fascinating because you kind of had this real whiplash of like you're dealing with someone who's just learning about social media and they've just started working in the advertising landscape. So straight over to the other end of the spectrum is like a CEO is now freaking out because his wife said there's a bad comment and we need to shut down all of our channels.
And managing that would be honestly like I don't know how you've all done it. Like anyone that's in social media now and has like evolved through it, like when comments were first made, like everyone was so. I remember having your own account, and if someone said something bad, you were like, oh, "How can they do that? Like you can't do that." And then it was like this. It was just the change in society, right? Like you don't publicly throw rocks at someone, but you could do it like through words here. Like good.
Definitely. And I think there's a bigger conversation to be had about like mental health for people working in social media. And it's something I'm passionate about. It's because a lot of the time social media managers are sitting at the coalface of social channels and copying the abuse of hundreds of disgruntled customers or unhappy kind of users and lots of different things. But a lot of the way that our support systems are built at the moment are really geared to like help internally inside of the business. And it's not necessarily putting support structures in place for someone who's having to deal with a crisis in social media. So, for example, say your brand has something go wrong at a factory. it's not the social media manager's fault that it's gone wrong at the factory, but they're usually the one taking the brunt of all of these comments and negativity as well. And I do think it is something that's like a bigger industry issue that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
how
I
we
could
manage
only
that.
imagine. Like you're punching bags, like as well. Like you're these huge pockets of money, but you're also copying both sides of the spectrum. So the good, bad, ugly, I guess you could say. Um, where to next? What was your next position, and where did that take you?
Yeah, so my next position was at Bastion. So after I finished at Toyota Finance, I was about to take a job at Chartered Professional Accountants, which would have been a great opportunity. But at the time, someone reached out with this job to work on the Microsoft account for an agency called Bastion. And given that Microsoft owned Xbox and me being a gamer, I was like, I really want to work on that one. So
I'm
a bit
going.
of a pivot there. So I ended up going back into agency, which I didn't think I was going to do at the time. But I ended up going back into agency and then working at Bastion for close to 5 years. Originally starting off as the social director for Microsoft and working on that account and managing a team. But then in time, that role evolved into working on Xbox, one of the pieces of business that I was able to win at the time. And yes, a huge passion driven for me. So I was very excited about that. But this role really kind of took me back to a lot of the roots of social media. Instead of it necessarily being about buying or selling ads, it was really about community management in the beginning, as well as measurement and like how did we support Microsoft in terms of using their tools at the time to engage with their customers. But over time, that role evolved, as did the requirements of our business in that capacity. And like I said, in time, we were able to win the Xbox business. And then we're also able to start to do paid media as well as doing bigger campaigns and like creative pieces. And I think what was exciting about that was I was starting to really draw on a lot of the different experiences that I'd had in my career there. So drawing on the paid background at Cara, also drawing on the monetization background I'd had at Fairfax, as well as just drawing on the community management background I'd had way back when at Holler. It also was where, again, working with a team, and in this case, actually managing a team, it taught me a lot about what it meant to manage and kind of having empathy for others. I've always had quite a live to work or work to live, and I sit in the live to work space. I love working, and it taught me a lot about kind of respecting other people and having to move around that. We were also seeing some really like fundamental shifts in terms of like how people work together as well, in terms of like being respectful of your colleagues in terms of pronouns, as well as just like creating safe spaces as well. And advertising as an industry was probably a little bit behind on that at the time, whereas now it's caught up, which is really great. But at the time, it was kind of a big transition there. So there were lots of really kind of steep learning curves for me as a manager, just in terms of being with people and like how that was playing out, but also being in social media, which is like at the forefront of like trends and community. And like I said, being, like you said, sorry, being a bit of a punching bag for unhappy customers as well. Um, but at its core, still also working very closely with Microsoft, our client, to help communicate things to them in terms of like, here are our platforms, here are our services, here are our tools. These are the different things that we're doing in order to kind of get new business and results across the line for them as well. So yeah, I really kind of took all of the experience I'd had before that and poured it into this job at Bastion in order to be able to kind of grow that account and grow that business. And yeah, like get to work on some of the things I'd always wanted to do since I was a kid, gaming, which was super fascinating and exciting for me as well at the time.
And how long's that? What year are we in now?
So I joined Bastion in 2017, September 2017.
And when did you first start in your career, like your professional
May
career?
2008.
I still remember getting my first Facebook account in 2008. So for me, you're literally starting at the beginning, and you finally got there. 10 years and you're working in Xbox and heading up their social media like piece there inside Bastia. How do you
Yeah.
feel now? Are you at the top of your game?
I really loved what I was doing there. And like for me at the time, like I don't think I was ever thinking that I was at the top of my game because I felt like it was an impossible thing to forever learn. But I definitely felt like I'd achieved like a milestone in terms of the things I'd set it out from at high school. So like I said, I kind of envisioned myself working in gaming. I didn't think I would be doing it in the marketing sense. And the more I learned about marketing as my career went on and advertising, things like that, I realized that there were a lot of really great things about it. So to be able to marry that into gaming, which was my like kind of hobby and my passion outside of work, it was a dream. And like I worked with some really amazing clients, and I worked with a really amazing talented team as well, and like who kind of pushed me to be a better manager as well as being a better kind of worker. And I think that like for me it was a really great experience. That I wouldn't say where I achieved things like self-actualization, but instead it just kind of gave me the creative freedom to like really pursue bigger ideas, more creative ideas, and like I said, draw on like all of the different experiences I'd had at the time. And I feel like it's rare that you get that kind of opportunity 10 years into your career, because you're like doing everything else, and then all of a sudden you're kind of doing the thing you always wanted to do indirectly. And like I was able to travel to E3 in 2019, which was, I believe, the last E3 ever, before they kind of closed it down due to COVID and everything else. I was able to work across Xbox Japan, Xbox Korea, Xbox Southeast Asia and India, as well as Australia and New Zealand. I got to help launch consoles and do all sorts of things. And I can spend an hour on all of these things.
Yeah, I was going to say, you hear your passion, Xander,
Yeah.
like your passion for marketing, your passion for these products, your passion for understanding the full life cycle as well, from, I guess, where marketing sits in that life cycle as well, and where social media strategies and everything sit inside there is so interesting. Like it's what you've learned throughout your career, right?
Yeah. And like this is also where I kind of got to flex like one of my biggest strengths, I think, for me, and like what's really kind of starting to define, I guess, the future of my career is process and operations. Because I was in a senior role working across a team and managing this part of the business, I had to develop processes that would enable our team to focus more on doing their day-to-day work, so that they didn't have to worry about like the back end side of things, like how did we bill our clients effectively, or how did we ensure like we had data security requirements in place that would ensure that like if it went pear-shaped, we could fix things quickly. And it started to get me thinking about process, as well as thinking about like the operational side of marketing. And I think like as an industry, like this is where we're starting to shift as well, is that we talk a lot about like in marketing, the campaign. So the billboards or like the big marketing stunts that like you see drones up in the sky now, or you see, like I said, a big billboard or something that happens. Those are really like really small flashes in a pan compared to like the months and months and months of work that happened prior to that big beat. The like the thinking, the planning, the buying, the measurement, and all of that stuff that has to happen up front for this really small moment, which is then followed by like a lot of reporting, analysis, and kind of reflection as well. And it's that kind of upfront and that post campaign piece that I'm really interested in. And that's kind of where operations sits now. And for me, that's where I think there's a real gap in terms of marketing experience as well. So a lot of the time we're so fixated on doing the creative, big, shiny thing, and we're starting to forget that, like, actually, if we have good process up front, we can get to the big, shiny thing faster next time because we learned from the last time. And then you can kind of speed up that process. But then you can measure it more effectively. And then you can also quantify it so that when you go back to the business, it's not just a huge outgoing expense. It's like, actually, we paid Y dollars and got Z results back, which I think is super fascinating as well.
Now, you said you didn't like accounting, but you've moved straight into accounting and
Ironically,
data
now the
analytics
numbers
now,
get
haven't you?
Wait, what? So yeah, like I worked there for close to 5 years, as I mentioned, which was really great. Kind of joined as a director and culminated the career there as the group social director. So having one Xbox's business, one Microsoft's business, and kind of really sitting in more of a process focused role where it's kind of enabling a team, which I really enjoyed as well.
So where to next? Where was your next role? What took you away from the love of your life, Xbox?
Yeah.
Aside from your wife.
So I had the opportunity to join a startup called Livewire, who were doing some really fascinating stuff in the gaming advertising space. So as gaming has become more and more popular, there are billions of players worldwide now. One of the things that's kind of emerged is this opportunity to reach gamers through advertising in games. And the team at Livewire hired me to join as their head of social. which was a great opportunity. But unfortunately, it didn't really pan out as much of a social role as it turned into more of a sales role. And I guess going back to your point about having hard conversations, this was one of those conversations I had to have where it's like, you've hired me as a head of social, but the reality is I'm not doing social, I'm doing sales, and sales isn't my passion. And as a result, after a couple of months in that role and seeing them grow and do great things, even in that small amount of time, I ended up moving to Amazon in 2022, where I was hired as a social media marketing manager. Okay, again, kind of going back into social, but now moving into a role where I was responsible for content, community, as well as also doing paid media as well across the board. Again, a really great role, but after a couple or about a year in role, it changed, kind of following my tradition of big organizational changes. So in the start of 2023, Amazon went through some big changes as a business as well. But more recently, kind of put in as more of an operations manager across the cans. So drawing on my love of process and my love of kind of following things through and kind of iterating, as well as kind of the number side of things as well. Now my job really is, like I said, about like how do I unlock more capacity for my team to focus on like that big flash in the pan moment, whilst I'd focus on like how do I enable them in terms of the upfront and the post flash in the pan moments as well.
So what is your, I guess, what next? Are you finished now, or have you moved into another position inside Amazon, or are you still in that position right now?
I'm still in this position at Amazon as the social operations manager, and it's something that I really love at the moment. I think that like any job, sometimes they can get a little bit stale or they can get even more exciting. And I think for me, that like this is probably the most exciting space to be in at the moment. Like
I think
there is so much happening in terms of like operations and efficiency, and we see it across the board. Like unfortunately, it's also a challenge across the board. Like we see structural changes in companies like Telstra, where we have layoffs happening at the moment. And I think it's because as companies have grown and grown and grown, you have huge numbers of employees, and maybe it's not efficient numbers of employees because we end up double handling things, or processes become convoluted because over time as they've evolved and as new people have joined, then they become another step in the process. And sometimes those processes can be smoothed out. And I think that AI and a lot of technology at the moment is really demonstrating where there are perhaps overworks happening in terms of process. And as a result, that's where we see people rolling back. But it was also the Spotify CEO that went out and spoke about how surprised he was by the impact of the layoffs they had earlier this year on their operations side of the business as well. And I think like as a whole, what we're starting to see is that there are more operational marketers coming into effect now, because marketing in itself has a lot of different kind of steps. You have to come up with a strategy, then you have to come up with a brief, creative, then you have to buy the ads, then you have to measure, blah, blah, blah. And it kind of, all of these different steps then also have lots of different stakeholders. And there is an opportunity for efficiency there. Not in terms of perhaps removing people, but just in terms of like operationally, how do we make it more efficient to get from point A to point B, whilst also ensuring the best possible outcomes, and so that we can focus more on those creative executions, like I mentioned.
Xander, from what you've just said, it sounds like a sales life cycle. It sounds like marketing is moving into, I'm not saying sales isn't there, sales is always there, but you're almost doing all the driving of the sales component now in comparison to, like, I would imagine a sales manager saying what you just said to me, not a marketing manager if you'd said that to me 10 years ago. What are your thoughts on that? Like, what is the future of marketing? Where does that sit in terms of like driving the sales component more than say sales agents themselves? Or have you already seen that transition start to happen with bots and everything?
I think it's a really interesting question, because I feel like with sales, it is like a skill set that's super important, and it's something that I lack. I don't actually feel comfortable getting on the phone and calling someone up and asking them to buy or sell my product. And I think it takes a very specific
You
kind
like
of
emails, right?
yeah. I mean, email. No, actually, I am a caller. I do like to call people instead of emailing, but I think that's because you lose a lot of like the
Yeah.
EQ when you send an email. Sometimes
Yes.
people take it completely wrong, and it's
Oh yeah. Now
yeah.
for automation, it's
Yeah.
horrible. Like I look there and I go, oh my God, did they just send me that? Like
Yeah, but that's the thing. But I think like sales as a skill set is not just in terms of like being able to sell a product, it's also about being able to build relationships and build rapport and things like that. And I think like with marketing, like some of the best marketers also have sales experience because they understand how to take their product and sell it to someone. And then from that process, they kind of understand the universal truth of whatever the product is that they're trying to market, whether it makes life easier or does it make you look better, something like that. Because that's how you sell it, right? You tell someone, like, this is what this product will do for you. And marketing's job is to take that message and also distill that and kind of bring that to life in marketing. And I think that's where I've seen some of the best marketers. But I think for operations, like I said, I'm trying to look at it from a top-down view and like look at what is that bridge between the sales guy and the marketing guy as well. Like how am I enabling that bridge and like how am I enabling them to have a conversation? So say that the sales guy wants to know like how much social conversation is happening out there about the product that he's trying to sell. Like could we perhaps build a dashboard or a reporting tool that will help answer that question? That's the first step, but then that's too manual. Now we have to spend time building and like checking this dashboard, exporting it, and sending it to the sales guy who's probably going to start chasing us because he wants the dashboard. So the next step in terms of iteration on the process or the operational side of things is, can I automate it? Cool. Now it's automated. Now it's going to him regularly. But then is he using it anymore? And like that's kind of where I think about it is like, is he using it? How is he using it? Is it beneficial? Is it taking time away from other initiatives and things like that?
Big
But now
process.
you scale this across all parts of marketing and it becomes like a bigger question overall.
It's so interesting chatting to you, Xander, today. Like, I just think it opens people's mind up to the possibilities of where you start and where you end. Like, not end yet, obviously, you've got another 20, 30 years ahead of you. But this evolution is just, it's just insane. Like, in my mind, like thinking about like how it all started. One tip or advice you'd give to anyone wanting to go down this career path?
Just be open to change. Like I said, I recently spoke to someone who wasn't particularly happy with how things were going because of a lot of change they were experiencing themselves, which I can totally understand. But I think one of the things that has like really driven me and helped me do well in my career is because of all of the change I've experienced, like with redundancies at Fairfax or manager changes throughout my career, is that being able to thrive in ambiguity really helps you as an individual kind of roll and move forward as well. Whereas if you become fixated, like, I just got a new manager, don't want to change my manager, that's fair enough. But I feel like you kind of put yourself in a position where you are more susceptible to feeling ill at ease with what's going on around you. Whereas if you accept that people will come and go in life and in work, or things will change in terms of like the structure of the business, and your job might not be the same job tomorrow, and you can accept that, you're more likely to be able to adapt and just enjoy what you're doing. And that's always been the thing for me. Like, it's very hard to focus when you start a new job and the headlines are 3,000 people have been made redundant. Or like I said last year, where it was
Resilience and growth.
18,500 people were made redundant
Yeah.
on like my
Mental
second or
health
third
as
day of the
well.
job.
Like, oh,
Exactly. But what I have learned is not to focus on that and just being comfortable kind of operating with a bit of ambiguity, and also just kind of jumping on opportunities and saying, yeah, I'll try that. What's the worst that can happen? You learn something new that you can kind of carry forward, or you learn something and you're like, great, I don't need to know that for the future, but at least I tried. So yeah, just kind of being comfortable with a bit of ambiguity in terms of your career is going to make a huge difference in terms of like your adaptability in terms of like as change comes and goes.
brilliant. Well, look, thank you for joining us tonight, Xander. I really appreciate it. And I know the viewers at home will love your story. So, once again, a great journey. And yeah, thank you once again for joining us.
No problem. Thank you for having me. It's great chatting.
See you, Xander.
Bye.